Okay. So we're going to do a screen share, which will start in just a second, but I wanted to make an introductory remark about the general mood which I may exhibit during this shiur. One of the most difficult aspects of Tisha B'Av, from my personal perspective, is to put on a long face. That is to preserve an atmosphere of mourning, of sadness. And that may have something to do with my own personality. But it also perhaps reflects some type of insight according to the Hasidic approach towards Tisha B'Av. I'd like to just tell you a little anecdote. Many, many years ago, it must have been in the early 70s, I had come to Israel, and on Tisha B'Av, I took a tour. I saw an ad, a tour of the old city with a Chabad shaliach. So, yeah, free, fantastic. Second tour of the Ir HaAtikah, the old city of Yerushalayim, with this Chabad shaliach. And what was shocking to me is how jovial this Chabadnik was. And this was on Tisha B'Av. He was telling jokes and really in a very exuberant, elevated mood. And struck me as very strange. And only many years later did I see the Chabad theory behind this notion of, even on Tisha B'Av, not necessarily putting on a long face and sort of countenance of depression. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the famous expression, "Shnichnas Av mematim b'simcha," that when Av enters, we reduce in simcha. And there is a tradition, a Hasidic tradition, which Chabad particularly has publicized, and that is a unique reading of that expression, that when Av enters, we reduce in simcha. Well, what is the object of the reduction? So the simple pshat is we reduce in joy. But this Hasidic interpretation is when Av enters, we reduce Av. We reduce the sadness associated with Av. How? The simcha. By having simcha even during Av, and even perhaps on Tisha B'Av, as I witnessed myself when I was quite young. When looks in Sefer HaTanya, the great classic work of Chabad Hasidut, so the author there discusses how pernicious sadness is, how dangerous it is. This could explain perhaps why even on Tisha B'Av we have to be very careful about the kind of mood we put ourselves in. The Baal HaTanya explains that sadness is a low energy state. I think we could all understand that. When a person is clinically depressed, sometimes they can't go to bed at all. In order to be able to serve Hashem properly, that is to get ourselves to do the things we should do, and to prevent ourselves from doing the things we shouldn't do, that requires energy. And therefore, we have to be in a state of high energy, which is associated with simcha. Only a state of simcha, of high energy, can we get ourselves to do the things we should do and prevent ourselves from doing the things we shouldn't do. As the example of two wrestlers, maybe of equal strength. However, if one of them is depressed on the wrestling day, he's going to lose. Because even though he may be strong inherently, but because of his low energy state of sadness, he won't in fact be successful in the wrestling match. And so too, Jews, as those who have our goal to be Odei Hashem, to serve Hashem properly, we have to be in a high energy state, which is the state of simcha. So if I smile too much in the course of today's discussion and I seem rather enthusiastic, you'll forgive me, but my inner Lubavitcher is somehow expressing itself. Okay, let's dig into our topic for today. So we're going to do a little screen share here. Let's see. You know, you have to highly be. I'm in the middle of a shiur, grandchild here.
That's us.
Hang on a second, having a little technical issue here.
Sorry.
Arthur, I sent it to you. Can you screen share it?
Yeah, so do you see my screen share now? Do you see it says baseless hatred, baseless love?
No, but I forwarded
hang
the
on.
WhatsApp to Arthur.
Yeah, hang on a second. Let's try this again. For some reason, I'm not seeing the. Here we go. Got shrunk down. Oh, okay, let's try again. Screen share. Hang on. Do you see my text? Did it
Yeah.
go on? No,
Yeah.
hang on. Okay, I think I know what's going on.
No, it was just up. You had it up.
That was working.
Yep. It's
Okay,
up.
how about now?
It's good.
Yeah.
You did
Okay,
it.
yeah, great. Okay, sorry for that. Okay, so as everybody here knows, the Talmud comes to the conclusion that the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of the three cardinal sins, and the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of the sin of Sinat Chinam. So I want to spend just a moment discussing what is Sinat Chinam, baseless hatred, and a very fresh perspective on Sinat Chinam. Unfortunately, all too relevant definition of Sinat Chinam, baseless hatred. So the Gemara, when it discusses this particular issue of the reasons for the destruction of the two Batei Mikdash, so the Gemara there at the end has this interesting phrase. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar Damri Tarvayu Rishonim Shenitgaleh Avonam Nitgaleh Kitzam Achonam Shelo Nitgaleh Avonam Lo Nitgaleh Kitzam. So the Gemara there says that the generation of the first Beit HaMikdash, whose sin was revealed to them, therefore the end of exile was also revealed to them. The Achronim, meaning the generation of the second Beit HaMikdash, which includes today, since there is no third Beit HaMikdash, so we're also that generation of destruction in that sense. Shelo Nitgaleh Avonam, that their sin was not revealed to them. Therefore, the end of exile was not revealed to them. And it goes on and on and on, and we have no idea when it's going to finish. Now, Rashi interprets this particular passage in the following way. He says, the generation of the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, they didn't conceal their sins. They sinned openly. Three cardinal sins. These are very, many of them are public acts, and they weren't embarrassed about it. And since it was open and exposed, so therefore, don't ask me why the therefore, Yirmiyahu, the prophet, told them that the exile is going to last for 70 years. They knew from the outset that it was only going to be 70 years, the exile. But the generation said of second Beit HaMikdash, that they sinned in private, that outwardly they were pious, but their sins were concealed. So therefore, there's also concealed the end of exile. Truth of the matter is, it's a difficult understanding of the Gemara there. But I saw in a current sefer from a living rabbi, amazing thing, living rabbi. This is of Gabriel Sinner, who is a Hasidic posek, very distinguished in the holy city of Brooklyn. He has a whole series on halakha called Nite Gabriel. He has an amazing shot. Let's take a look what he says here. He says, let's just read it in English for efficiency's sake. One can further explain, he first explains Rashi. In the case of the former, the people in the first temple era, whose sin was exposed, the end of their punishment was exposed. For it was known to them that they had done severe transgressions, were exposed to them, and therefore the end of exile was revealed to them, and they were redeemed. Okay. So that sounds like Rashi. But the latter, for whom their sin was not revealed, Rashi just says they sinned in secret. And therefore, the end of exile was not revealed. But he interprets it differently. But the latter, the generation of the second Beit HaMikdash, whose sin was not revealed, that includes us, since the sin of Sinat Chinam, baseless hatred, was never revealed to them. On the contrary, in their hatred of each other, they thought they were performing a mitzvah due to the various reasons of their hatred. They therefore thought that the repentance, teshuvah, would be, on the contrary, to hate greater zeal and to perform the mitzvah of hatred with greater intensity, of awe and love of God. For this reason, the end of exile is never revealed, for each person increases the very cause of exile. So I'll just put that in plain language. He says an amazing thing. When we hate, no one ever thinks it's baseless hatred, particularly if it's because we feel we were wronged, or even more fierce sometimes, out of ideological reasons, and particularly when it's hatred of our ideological components. It's a holy hatred. It's a holy, I put that in quotes, a holy zeal. And therefore, when the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash occurred, the only thing we know is we have to do tshuva. When something terrible happens, we have to repent. What is repentance? It means to do the mitzvot with greater zeal, with greater intensity. So therefore, since I think my hatred is a mitzvah, therefore I'm going to hate with greater intensity. But in a spirit of love and awe of God, I'm going to hate my ideological opponents. And therefore, the end of exile never comes, because our tshuva, in quotes, digs the pit of exile ever deeper. The remedy is the illness. And therefore, the end of exile never comes. So explains Nite Gabriel, amazingly pertinent and relevant explanation of that particular Gemara. Now, that's a rather depressing note on Tisha B'Av, perhaps appropriate to Tisha B'Av. But I now want to segue from the illness to the authentic remedy. And that is the extremely famous statement associated with Rav Kook. Let's read that in Hebrew. V'im nechravnu, v'nechrav olam imanu, sinat chinam. If we were destroyed, and the whole world was destroyed with us because of sinat chinam, nashuv libanot, we will to be rebuilt, v'olam imanu, and the whole world with us, yibaneh, will be rebuilt, chinam, baseless love. By the way, his formulation is fascinating, because he doesn't say if the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed or second Beit HaMikdash in this particular case through Sinat Chinam, it'll be rebuilt through Avat Chinam. He actually says if we were destroyed and the whole world destroyed with us, it's not just the building, but there's something cosmic here. There's a kind of a self-destruction that manifested itself in the Beit HaMikdash, but it's a destruction which is much deeper than that, much more systemic. We ourselves destroyed ourselves. We ourselves, along with self-destruction, destroyed the world along with us. Rav Kook also is reported to have said, "Mutav shekashel b'ahavat chinam." It's better that I stumble with ahavat chinam. He was accused of too loving, not discerning enough. So he said, I would prefer to stumble with excess, baseless love, rather than making a mistake with regards to baseless hatred. What's interesting, isn't this just a historical side point? Rav Kook did not invent this concept of ahavat chinam, baseless love, as a cure for baseless hatred. I did a little bit of digging around, and I found that a Hasidic Rebbe, Rabbi Yechezkel of Kozmir, who passed away before Rav Kook was born. Rav Kook was born in 1865. Rabbi Yechezkel of Kozmir died in 1856. And he already said, and I quote, "Just as the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash was through baseless hatred, its rectification required baseless love, that all of Israel love each other without cause." So this statement associated with Rav Kook was not particular to Rav Kook. For some reason, he got lucky, and it's associated with him. But it's actually an established saying before him. And nowadays, it's quoted by across the board from A to Z, not necessarily in the name of Rav Kook, which is could be justified because Rav Kook didn't own it, and he certainly didn't make it up. Now, what I want to try to understand is, what is ahavat chinam, baseless love, and how does one accomplish it? Very important. We're sick. There's a remedy. How do we access that remedy? And how do we engage that remedy in a way which is effective? So, well, let's take the notion of loving our fellows. And believe it or not, it's not just a piece of good advice in Shulchan Aruch, but it's a explicit positive mitzvah in the Torah, to love your fellow as yourself. And to illustrate the problematics of loving in this way of ahavat chinam, baseless love, I want to share with you Ramban's explanation of the mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself, as found in the Torah. What Ramban says here, "And thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." Now he explains. In Hebrew, he says haflaga, one word. Translating that one word, look how it took all these English words. This is an expression by way of overstatement. All those English words were necessary to translate one Hebrew word, haflaga. Haflaga means an exaggeration. That's Ramban saying. He says it doesn't mean what you might think it means. Words say, love your fellow as yourself. I'm supposed to feel this emotion of love towards another person I can feel towards myself. So Ramban says, it doesn't mean that. It can mean that. Why not? For a human heart is not able to accept a command to love one's neighbor as oneself. That's an amazing thing. Ramban says it's impossible. It's impossible for a human being to love another human being as he loves himself. Now, I want to think about that for a second. Is that so impossible? What does he mean? Perhaps he is addressing what I think fairly could be the most primal drive of the human being to exist, self-preservation. Self-preservation is the most primal drive of the human being. And if we buy into the theory of evolution, we can understand why. Among the animal kingdom, to be is the primal instinct, the primal drive. So our reptilian brain still has that element in it. To be is our primal commitment. Now, of course, Ramban is way before Darwin, and he's not referring to any kind of evolutionary theory, but I think he is reflecting the psychological notion of this primal commitment to our own existence. Now, you might say that there are people who give up their lives for other people, and perhaps Ramban might say it's true, but that's unusual. When the Torah says you should love your fellows yourself, it's not referring to unique human beings that are capable of such profound transcendence that they give up their lives for other people. It's a mitzvah that applies to everybody. We can't ask every Jew to love his fellow as he loves himself. That's something that's unique, perhaps unique for mothers, perhaps unique for great tzaddikim, the Israeli army, people who have given up their lives for other people. That's unique. So what does it mean for us, most people, when it says, love others as yourself? We'll get to that in a second. Because Ramban says, I'll prove to you, even in a halachic sense, it's not true, that we're not commanded to love other people as ourselves. And he points to a Gemara. More for Rabbi Akiva has already come and taught your life takes precedence over the life of your fellow being. This famous Gemara, two people wandering the desert. One has water, the other one doesn't. There's only enough water to preserve the life of the person who has the water. If they share it, they'll both die. If the one who has the water drinks it, he'll live. Well, what do you do with it? So the halacha is, according to Rabbi Akiva, that chayecha kodmin, that keep your water, preserve your own life, and the other person will die. Okay. It's tragedy. So that halacha, Ramban shows you that there's no mitzvah to love the other person as yourself in the deepest and most authentic sense of the word. There's a primal commitment to oneself. Someone's microphone is not muted, so please mute it. Rather, so what does it mean? The commandment of the Torah means that one is to love one's fellow being in all matters as one loves all good for oneself. What he means by this is the following. It's not directed to the heart. It doesn't mean actually to love, to be committed to somebody else in the same way that you're emotionally, primally committed to oneself. It means, in fact, to be concerned behaviorally with other people's well-being in the same way that you are concerned with your own well-being. On a day-to-day level, you look out for other people in practical matters, as a general rule, in the same way that one would look out for one's own interests. Fine, that's all it is. I'm not sure I should say that's all it is, right? That's also very hard to do, but it's not a commandment to the heart to love another person as you love yourself. And then he even points out there's a grammatical clue to the fact that it really doesn't mean to love another person as yourself. So he says the following. It is possible that since it does not say, and thou shalt love et reacha as thyself, but instead liken them in the word lireacha, which literally means to the neighbor. I'll explain that in a second. Generally speaking, when you have a verb with an action, and there's an object of that verb, so we put before that object, that noun, the word et. Right? Et signifies a direct object of a verb. So it really should have said, v'ahavta, you should love et reacha, your fellow. If it meant that the fellow is the object of the love which is in your heart. Et reacha. Doesn't say this, it's lireacha. You should seek for the well-being, for the interests. Look out for the interests of your fellow. Live. 4. Look out for the interests of your fellow as you look out for your own interests. So the Ramban comes to the conclusion that, in fact, there is no mitzvah to actually be committed on the deepest emotional sense to somebody else. It means to look out for their interests. Now, where does that leave us? What about this notion of havat chinam, baseless love, as the cure for the illness of baseless hatred? According to Ramban, there's no such mitzvah. And certainly, if there's no mitzvah of the basic love your fellows yourself, in the emotional sense, then certainly havat chinam, taking that notion of love to its most extreme extent of utterly unjustified love, meaningless, impossible. I'd like to show you that there is an approach which says it's not impossible. It is possible. Not surprisingly, we're going to take a look at how the Baal Tanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Ladi, the author of Tanya, founder of Chabad Hasidut, explains this mitzvah. And as is famously known, this analysis is found in the 32nd chapter of the book Tanya. The way you indicate 32 in Hebrew is with the Hebrew letters Lamed Bet, which spell heart. So chapter heart, Lamed Bet, which is 32, deals with this mitzvah of to love one another from the heart, authentically, not like Ramban says, where it's just look out for their interests. How do you do that? Just take a look at how he explains this, and that, again, you know what? Okay, we'll do it in English. I was tempted because I see with that word, our time is still pretty good here. But we'll do it in English. The Baal Tanya says the following: finding joy only in the joy of the soul alone is a direct and easy way to attain the fulfillment of the commandment, love your fellow as yourself, toward every soul of Israel, both great and small. For the soul and spirit who can know their greatness and excellence in their root and source in the living God. So let's talk about this. The chapters right before the 32nd chapter in Tanya deal with how does one break down ego? How does one break down a fundamentally materialistic, self-centered approach towards the world, which is a tremendous impediment to spirituality, to service of God, for obvious reasons. And he explains how to do that, which we're not going to get into today. It's a little scary. Just to give you a taste, he quotes from the Zohar. They use the metaphor. If you have a log that you're trying to use to have a fire, a bonfire, you're making kumsitz outside, and you're making a midra, a fire. You have a big log. It's not catching on fire. You have to break up that log, splinter it into small pieces. That's the Zohar. So that's how one breaks down one's ego, one's self-centeredness, one's kind of materialistic approach towards life. Take that log of the ego and splinter it into small parts. Exactly how that's done, like I said, that's the topic for another time. But then here in this chapter, he says, now that we've accomplished that we've been able to break down the ego, break down the self-centeredness, which is an expression of ego, and the fundamentally material view of the world, which is also an expression of ego. And now we are God-centered instead of self-centered. And we have special lenses, spiritual lenses. You can get them in Efrat, in the optometry store there. Special spiritual lenses. And you see the world in a way which is not just material. You see the spiritual underpinnings of existence. Instead of seeing things through the lens of self-interest and ego, one sees beneath the surface the divine level of reality. So when we look at another person, instead of seeing another person who may be likable, maybe not very likable, maybe very beautiful and handsome, maybe not so, maybe incredibly intelligent and charming, maybe not so, both great and small. When we view that person with lenses that are not infected with egotistical, self-centered, materialistic drives, what do we see? We see the Tselem Elohim, the divine image within them, the divine soul. And when it comes to divine soul, who can know their greatness and excellence in their root and source of the living God? What, my divine soul is greater than your divine soul? I can imagine kids in a playground, a Hasidic playground. My dad's divine soul is greater than your dad's divine soul. I hope when they become more adults, they wouldn't think like that. When we talk about divine soul, how is one supposed to measure and compare the quality and greatness, elevation, etc., of the divinity within all of us? If we can view another person as the embodiment of the image of God, just as we love God, an extension of that love of God is the love of that person, the love of the divinity within them. So says the Baal Hatanya. And he adds to that, being moreover all of a kind and all having one Father. Therefore, all Israelites are called real brothers by virtue of the source of their souls in the one God. Only the bodies are separated. So he's adding something. The first point was what I would like to call vertical. I looked at Arthur, who's actually very easy to love, so it's not a very good example. Let's pretend he wasn't. What do I see? I see a divine soul. And therefore, my love of God expresses itself in the love of Arthur. Okay, so I see Arthur and I see an aspect of divinity. Like Baal Tanya says very famously, that we possess Chelek Elokah Mimal Mamish. I had to say Mamish, not Mamash. A piece of God from above, really, not a metaphor. And therefore, we look at that person and our view perhaps is vertical, right? That he is an expression of something higher, divinity. Now he's adding perhaps horizontal. But wait a second. We are all expressions of that divinity. We all contain this godly soul. And therefore, we're all brothers because we all come from the same divine source, our heavenly parent, right? And therefore, there's a love which is horizontal, the love of people who share that common kinship, that common source. So if we're able to see the world through spiritual eyes, we can love another person, whether great or small, as a function of their being one who possesses that divine soul. Our love of God extends into love of them. We also feel a profound sense of being twins, not just brothers and sisters, twins. Okay. However, if we don't view things through these spiritual lenses, we view things through ego, through self-centeredness, through materialistic vision, well then, only the bodies separate us, as he goes on to say. Hence, in the case of those who give major consideration to their bodies, while regarding their souls as of secondary importance. I know I have a soul, but somehow I don't really experience that in a palpable way. So if that's the way I view the world, there can be no true love and brotherhood among them. Impossible. Like Ramban said. Except for the Baal Hatanya thinks that we can wear spiritual lenses. We're capable of being God-centered truly. We're capable of having a spiritual orientation and seeing beyond the material. Well, what's left if one doesn't have these spiritual lenses? What kind of love? Only a love which is dependent on a transitory thing. Ahava hatluya b'davar. A love which is dependent upon something else. What does that mean? Transactional love. And unfortunately, that's the way the world primarily exists. What do you do for me? I actually feel very sorry for those who need to make a quick decision about whether to marry somebody. Get out their checklist. Are you going to supply the following 6 things for me? Right? Okay. Well, 5 out of 6 is not bad. Okay, you pass. You're speed dating. You pass. I think that's an understandable way of approaching things. Unfortunately, that's a contingent love. A love which is dependent upon something else. And a love like that doesn't last. You know, not everybody is going to be as handsome as Arthur when they're Arthur's age. Right? Beauty and grace are things which don't necessarily stick around. Wealth, all kinds of things that we base our love on. If love is dependent upon those other elements, what do you do for me? We have divorce. Okay. Then he goes on to explain an amazing Gemara, which actually doesn't make sense, but he's going to explain it. That is what Hillel the elder meant when he said in regards to the fulfillment of this commandment, this is the whole Torah, while the rest is but commentary. Right? Famous Gemara. A prospective convert comes to Hillel, teach me the whole Torah while I'm standing on one foot. And the answer is not exactly the quote here, but that which is hated to you, don't do to others. But the mitzvah, which is the basis of that, is but then Hillel says, okay, that's the basis of the whole Torah. The rest is all commentary, and go learn it. So if you think about it for a second, it makes no sense whatsoever. Because there's 2 aspects of Torah. There are the mitzvot, which regulate the way we relate to God. Mitzvot ben adam lamakom. And then the mitzvot, which relate to how we interact with other people. The mitzvot, which are ben adam l'chavero, interpersonal. I can understand if he were to say, love your fellows yourself, is the basis of all the interpersonal mitzvot. Makes sense. But since when is and love your fellows yourself the basis for keeping kosher, for not wearing shatnas, or many other mitzvot which regulate our relationship with God? That makes no sense. Nothing to do with it. So he's not going to explain mystically what Hillel must have meant, because everybody knows that Hillel was a Lubavitcher. So this is going to sound mystical, and it is, and we'll try to explain it. This is the following. For the basis and root of the entire Torah are to raise and exalt, I'm going to explain this, the soul high above the body, reaching into the source and root of all the worlds, and also to bring down the blessed light of the Ein Sof, the infinite, upon the community of Israel, as will be explained later. That is, into the fountainhead of the souls of all Israel, to become one into one. Now, I know that may have sounded like gobbledygook, so I want to see if we can explain that. For some reason, there's writing on this document now. I don't know exactly what's going on there, but this is truly a mystical experience. Okay. What is he talking about? He says, according to Kabbalah, what's the point of Torah? It's bidirectional. On the one hand, it's to raise and exalt the soul high above the body. reaching into the source and root of all worlds. That is, that we elevate our souls from the material, from being mired in a very physical orientation, and unite our souls with its source, in God. So a kind of upward movement of the soul, where the soul is trying to transcend it, being anchored and imprisoned in physicality. And Torah is a mechanism for the elevation of the soul, for dveikut, the sense of communion with our divine source. That's one direction. But then he says, and also to bring down the blessed light of the Ein Sof upon the community of Israel, into the fountainhead of the souls of all Israel, to become one into one. That is the other direction. The other purpose of Torah, and perhaps in a certain sense the ultimate purpose of the Torah, is to use the expression, again popularized by Chabad, to make for God a dira b'tachtonim, a dwelling place in this material world. That if God wanted us to be in a state of unity with him, then why did he take this soul, which before we were born existed in some type of spiritual dimension in which it was in a state of mystical communion with God, presumably, and instead he put it into my body? That's a problem. That certainly is a new state of existence, which makes it problematic to maintain that sense of mystical communion of my soul with its divine source. Well, that's because God wants his presence to be felt in this material world for reasons we won't discuss today. Dira b'tachtonim, that God's presence should dwell even in this lowest of the worlds. So there's this bidirectionality to elevate the soul, but at the same time to bring divinity down here. A meeting between our souls and God, between us and God, in which not just that we, as it were, escape from the material world to commune with God, but in fact that we bring God down into this world. It's a really important and fundamental idea in Hasidut and Kabbalah. Sometimes explained with the pasuk, which explains the angels going up and down. Ratzo v'shov, ratzo v'shov. The angels, ratzo is they go up, but shov, they go back down. There's that kind of rhythm. And ultimately one goes up in order to then bring down that divine presence into this material world. That's the purpose of life. To bring down the Shekhinah into this material world. To make for the Shekhinah a kind of landing pad, a kind of vessel in this material world, which will primarily dwell, that Shekhinah, within the kind of collective soul of the Jewish people. That's what he means by the fountainhead of all the souls of Israel. We have a collective soul, which is going to be the vessel for the Shekhinah to be in this material world, to become one into one, so that the oneness of God can dwell among the oneness of the Jewish people. Now he says the following. This is impossible. Now remember, this is the purpose of all mitzvot. Whether those mitzvot regulate the way we relate to other people, or whether those mitzvot regulate the way we relate to God. It's to bring one into one, the divine presence into this material world, by building for the Shekhinah a vessel, a dwelling place, a landing pad, as it were, within the collective soul of the Jewish people. This is impossible, the Baal HaTanya goes on, if there is, God forbid, disunity among the souls. For the holy and blessed be he does not dwell in an imperfect place. And he says, amazing thing. If there is one quality that we know about God and that we emphasize multiple times each day, Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad, the oneness of God, the intrinsic and essential unity of one God. Oneness can only dwell in a place of oneness. The oneness of God cannot be broken up into compartments. A little bit of God here, a little bit of God there, etc. Because God cannot be divided. And so therefore, to create for God a dwelling place in this world, it can only be on a landing pad, as it were, in a vessel which expresses that essential unity. In order to bring down the one God, the God of essential unity, it has to be in a vessel of essential unity. And therefore, unless we can love each other essentially by putting on these unique lenses that you can purchase in Efrat, which allow us to go beyond ego drives and materialistic perspectives, self-centeredness, and to be able to see the divine soul within each of us, and therefore to love each other essentially. In the absence of that, there is fundamental disunity, and the Shekhinah cannot dwell in disunity. The oneness can only dwell in oneness. So therefore, the point of the entire Torah is only accomplished through love of our fellow Jew. Because oneness can only dwell in oneness. That's the point of the entire Torah, not just the mitzvot that are interpersonal, but the mitzvot which regulate our relationship with God as well. And that's what, according to this amazing explanation, Hillel meant when he said that this is the ability to love somebody else truly in a way which is not transactional, in a way which is not dependent upon what you give me. That's the basis of the entire purpose of our existence, the entire Torah. Now go out and learn. Difficult challenge. Now, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot describes Aaron famously. These amazing qualities of loving peace, pursuing peace. Oheveta briot. Was someone who loved people. The Baal Tanya points out it's an unusual term to refer to people. Oheveta briot. He loved people. Briot is not the normal way we refer to people. Briot means created beings, creatures. People, you could say Anashim, Bnei Adam, Bnei Yisrael, all kinds of ways of saying people, Bnei Adam. Why Briot? So the Baal Tanya explains this in light of everything he said so far. That this ability to love somebody essentially, because I see to their essence, which is that divine core, that love does not require any justification. I don't care how unattractive, how unappealing they are. I love them because God made them. That's all the justification I need. That love is avat chinam. Now we know what avat chinam is, baseless love. Baseless love means I require no justification. God created Bruce, and that divine essence of Bruce justifies love, regardless of how Bruce may live his life. In the case of Bruce, it's not a problem. He's very lovable. But imagine he wasn't. Avat chinam is unconditional love. To use a phrase which is bandied about a lot, but unconditional love in the Kabbalistic sense. A love which is justified by the other person having at his core divinity. There's an amazing expression of this idea in the Torah. So the Torah describes when someone committed a crime, capital offense, and they're executed. So the Torah says that the body's displayed, but it has to be taken down before nightfall. Why? So the Torah says, now we'll look at the Hebrew for this, Ki kilalat Elokim talui. For someone whose body is left out hanging, executed criminal, and the birds are pecking at the body and eating the flesh, left out to hang there for days, that's kilat Elokim. It's a disgrace of God. It's a disgrace of God. Why is that a disgrace of God? So Rashi quotes a very famous midrash. A disgrace of God, for man is made in his image. Bnei Israel are his children. It may be compared to the case of two twin brothers who very closely resembled each other. One became king and the other was arrested for robbery and was hanged. Two twin brothers, they look exactly alike. One's the king, one's a hardened criminal. The hardened criminal was hung. Everybody passed by and said, "Whoa, look what happened to the king. Oh my gosh." As the birds are tearing at the flesh of the corpse. So the king then says, "Take down that body, quick, because it's an abuse of me." That's the very powerful and beautiful midrash which Rashi cites. Even a convicted criminal who did a capital offense and who was rightfully and justifiably executed, with lovingly, of course, that body has to be treated with respect. Why? Because that was a person who's God's twin. That's the parallel. God's twin. That divine image at their core. Now, home stretch. The Tosfot Yom Tov, or Yom Tov Lippman Heller, when he addresses why it is that Aharon, who was obviously also a Lubavitcher and was able to love people essentially, Ohevet Briot, he loved people because of no other justification than their Briot, the word Borei, created by God. They have that divine essence. He goes even beyond what the Balatanya says, apparently. Look what he says. I would say he's a Lubavitcher on steroids. Look at this. What does it mean? Ohevet Briot. Aaron loved creatures. Lefi shem briotav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They are the creations of God. Lefichach ruei shtovem. Therefore, it's fit that you love them, since they're God's creations. You notice that the Balatanya focused on the divine soul. That's Tselem Elokim, divine image within the other, the divinity within the other. And therefore, we love that person as an extension of our love of God. And Balatanya even references Aaron, Ohevet Briot. Love people, even if the only thing they have going for them is the fact that God created them. No other admirable qualities other than that. But Tosfot Yom Tov says, not so much just the fact that there was a divine soul, but the mere fact they're created. So wait a second, by God. You might say, wait a second. So what about birds? They're also created by God. What about mountains? They're also created by God. What about lions, tigers, and bears, etc.? They're also God's creations. If Aharon loved others with no other justification than the fact that God had created them. As the Tosfot Yom Tov explains, what would be the implications of that about our relationship with the universe? Started off with Rav Kook, who's closely associated with this notion of avat chinam, unjustified love, love which needs no justification. I want to show you two brief passages of Rav Kook. Absolutely amazing. We'll read this in English. There is one who sings the song of one's soul, one's own soul. Inside of one's soul, one finds everything. There, one experiences one's total spiritual fulfillment. A person living internally in great peace, serenity, in a wonderful relationship with God within himself. Live in a cave, be very happy. And there is one who sings the song of the nation. One leaves the boundaries of the individual soul, which one finds narrow and not idealistic enough. One yearns for great heights with a deep love. One unites oneself to the entire Jewish people and sings its song. And one is pained by its sufferings and finds happiness in its dreams. One is immersed in deep thoughts concerning its past and future and tries to understand its inner spiritual nature with love and a wise heart. And there is one whose soul is so all-encompassing that it expands beyond the limits of the Jewish people. One sings the song of all of humanity. One's spirit ascends and becomes concerned with the greatness of mankind and its divine image. One seeks humanity's ultimate purpose. One looks forward to its ultimate perfection. From the source of life, one draws all of one's thoughts and insights, one's ideals and visions.
Wow.
And people should mute, please. And there is one who rises even higher until one unites with the entire world, with all creatures. Rav Heller, Ohevet the Briot, our own loved, all creatures, not just people, not just Jews, all creatures. With all of existence, and with all of them one sings. This is a person who is immersed in Perik Shirah, nature song, each day that is guaranteed the world to come. And then there is one who rises up with all these songs together. Each gives its voice, each plays its melody. The song of the soul, the song of the nation, the song of humanity, the song of all of existence. And each one harmonizes inside of him at every moment and at all times. And this simplicity in its fullness rises to become a song of holiness, the song of God, the song of Yisrael. And that because a play on the word Yisrael, make the sin a shin. Yisrael, Shar El, one who sings the songs of God. Shar El, Yisrael. That's what we are. We sing the song of God. It's a single song. No. It's a double song. No. It's a threefold song and a fourfold song. The attachment and love of self in the positive sense. The attachment and love of all of Israel. The attachment and love of all of humanity. And the attachment and love of all of existence. It is the song of songs of Solomon. Song of songs, the ultimate love poem, which is Solomon's, the king to whom peace belongs. We've seen today his avat chinam, baseless love, could be seen as an impossible task. Yet, Chassidut, Balatanya, argues, pleads with us to take off those old lenses of ego drives, of self-interest, only materialistic considerations, and put on those fresh spiritual lenses to see the underlying divinity behind all. With that fresh spiritual vision, we can love the other as an extension of our love of the divine. And not only that, but perhaps one could extend that even as we saw the Toso Yom Tov explain, and as Rav Kook seems to actually have embodied. Nothing capable of baseless love. Love which needs no justification in our fellow, but in all of existence, which is an extension, an expression of its divine root. And in this spirit, I want to wish everybody a successful Tisha B'Av, which perhaps we can take off these old lenses here, take a little bit of a lens cleaner here, clean them, put them back on, and to experience the joy of self-transcendence, the joy of a feeling of connectedness to God, with the implications of living in a state of shalom, of all of existence.
Thank
God bless
you.
you.